California, August 1945. 23 Japanese prisoners stepped off the transport ship at San Francisco Bay. Blinking in afternoon sunlight, they felt too bright, too peaceful for men who'd been taught that capture meant dishonor worse than death. They expected harsh treatment, perhaps worse. What they received, instead, hot showers, clean clothing, medical examinations conducted with professional courtesy, and meals served on metal trays that held more food than they'd seen in months, shattered every expectation. Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto, captured on Saipan a year earlier, stood in the processing facility and whispered to the man beside him, "This cannot be real." To understand what happened at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, in August 1945, you must first understand what 23 Japanese soldiers had been taught about capture and dishonor. Takeshi Yamamoto, 27, from a farming family in Nagano Prefecture, had been inducted into the Imperial Army in 1941. His training had been clear and unambiguous. Death before dishonor. Capture was unthinkable. Surrender was betrayal. A soldier who allowed himself to be taken alive had failed his emperor, his family, his ancestors, his nation. The indoctrination was systematic. Officers explained that Americans treated prisoners with extreme cruelty, torture, starvation, humiliation designed to break the spirit before ending the life. Better to die fighting. Better to take your own life. Better anything than the shame of captivity. Yamamoto had believed it. Why wouldn't he? Every source said the same thing. Training manuals, officers' speeches, letters from the front. The consistency was convincing. When he'd been wounded on Saipan in July 1944, shrapnel from artillery, left leg shattered, unable to walk, he'd tried to end his life rather than be captured. The grenade hadn't detonated properly. American medics had found him, treated his wounds, saved his life over his protests. He'd spent the past year in a hospital facility in Hawaii, recovering from his wounds, waiting to die from the mistreatment he knew was coming. It never came. The medical care was professional. The food was adequate. The guards were distant, but not cruel. Still, he waited. The real punishment would come when he was transferred to the mainland, when he reached the prison camps in America. That's when the suffering would begin. The other 22 prisoners shared similar stories. Captured across the Pacific, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippines. Most wounded when taken, unable to resist. All certain they understood what capture meant. All waiting for the cruelty they'd been promised. The voyage from Hawaii to San Francisco took 8 days aboard a hospital ship converted for prisoner transport. The Japanese captives were held in a secured section below deck, separated from American wounded being transported home. The conditions were confusing. They had bunks with mattresses. They received 3 meals daily, not generous, but sufficient. Medical personnel checked on them regularly. No one beat them. No one starved them. No one inflicted the suffering propaganda had described. "This is deception," said Corporal Kenji Nakamura, 32, captured on Iwo Jima. "They lure us into false security before the real treatment begins." "Perhaps," Yamamoto replied, but doubt was growing. A year of adequate treatment was a long deception. If Americans intended cruelty, why wait? Private Hiroshi Tanaka, 19, youngest of the group, was more direct. What if we were lied to? What if the propaganda about American treatment was false? The suggestion was met with silence. The possibility that everything they'd been taught was lies was too large to process. It meant their suffering, the shame of capture, the certainty of dishonor, was based on falsehoods. That was almost worse than actual torture would be. They arrived at San Francisco on August 14, 1945. As they disembarked, distant celebrations erupted across the city. They learned later Japan had surrendered. The war was over. They were no longer combatants, but simply defeated prisoners waiting for repatriation. The timing felt significant. They would experience American treatment not as wartime enemies, but as defeated opponents in a conflict that had ended. Whatever came next would define America's character more clearly than battlefield conduct ever could. The processing facility at Fort Mason was designed for efficiency. Hundreds of returning American soldiers flowed through daily. The Japanese prisoners were a small addition to the system, 23 men among thousands, distinguished only by their status and their obvious anxiety. They were lined up in a courtyard. August heat pressed down. Yamamoto's leg ached, always ached, a permanent reminder of Saipan and the wounds that had led to his capture. He leaned on a cane the American doctors had provided, waiting for whatever came next. A lieutenant approached Young, maybe 25, with a tired expression and a clipboard. He spoke in broken Japanese, clearly reading from a phonetic guide. You will be processed. Medical examination. Delousing. Clothing issue. Food. Transportation to camp. You will not be harmed. You are prisoners of war under Geneva Convention protection. Understood? The words were strange. Prisoners of war under protection. Convention. These weren't concepts their training had included. Capture meant suffering, not legal status and guarantees. They were taken in groups of 5 to shower facilities. Hot water, soap, clean towels. Yamamoto stood under the spray, washing away months of accumulated grime, unable to reconcile this with expectations. This felt like dignity, not humiliation. After showering, they received new clothing prisoner uniforms marked with PW on the back, but clean, intact, properly sized. Boots that fit, underwear, socks, basic necessities provided without comment or cruelty. Medical examinations followed. American doctors checked each prisoner thoroughly: wounds, infections, malnutrition, parasites. They treated what they found with professional efficiency. When they examined Yamamoto's leg, one doctor frowned. This healed poorly. You should have surgery to correct it. We can arrange that at the camp. Yamamoto stared. Surgery? To improve his condition? Why would you do this? The doctor shrugged. Because you need it. Geneva Convention requires adequate medical care. That includes corrective surgery. Geneva Convention. That phrase again. Whatever it meant, it apparently required Americans to treat prisoners as, what? Humans deserving care? The mess hall was enormous tables stretching into distance, capable of feeding hundreds simultaneously. The Japanese prisoners sat together at one section, surrounded by American soldiers eating their own meals, mostly ignoring the captives. Each prisoner received a metal tray with 6 sections. The servers American, enlisted men loaded the trays with food. Yamamoto stared at his tray, unable to process what he was seeing. Actual meat, not scraps or bones, but solid protein. Mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, bread with butter. An apple, coffee, milk. This is more food than officers received, Tanaka whispered. How can prisoners eat better than our commanders ate? No one had an answer. They ate slowly, cautiously, expecting the food to be taken away or poisoned, or somehow trick. It wasn't. It was just food. Good food. More food than many had seen in months. American soldiers at nearby tables ate the same meals. No distinction. Prisoners and guards consuming identical rations. The implication was staggering in America. Even prisoners ate as well as soldiers. The abundance was incomprehensible. Corporal Nakamura set down his fork, unable to eat more. I do not understand. We were defeated. We were captured. We brought shame to ourselves and our families. Why are they feeding us like honored guests? Geneva Convention, Yamamoto said, repeating the phrase he'd heard multiple times. Whatever that means, it requires this treatment. But why would they follow it? Tanaka asked. We are enemies. We killed their soldiers. Why show mercy? It was the central question, the puzzle that wouldn't resolve. Why mercy toward defeated enemies? Why care for prisoners when cruelty would be easier and perhaps justified? That evening, the prisoners boarded a train heading east. They traveled in a converted passenger car, not luxurious, but comfortable by military standards. Seats with padding, windows they could look through, a bathroom at one end, guards at both exits, but the guards looked bored, not threatening. The train rolled through California, into Nevada, across Utah. The prisoners stared out windows at landscape that seemed impossible vast emptiness. Mountains rising against sky, towns with lights burning without fear of air raids. America looked untouched by war, abundant, peaceful. They were never in danger, Nakamura said quietly. Their homeland was never threatened. No bombs, no invasions, no destruction. They fought an ocean away while their families remained safe. The realization was bitter. Japan had mobilized everything, every resource, every person, every sacrifice, while America had fought with only a fraction of its capacity, keeping the war distant from civilian populations. The disparity explained much about the war's outcome, but made defeat even more difficult to accept. On the second day, the train stopped in a small town in Nebraska. The prisoners were allowed to disembark for 15 minutes, to stretch their legs while the train took on water. They stood on the platform, guarded but not restrained, watching American civilians go about daily life. Children played. Women shopped. Men worked. No one looked hungry or frightened. The war had ended 2 days earlier, but the celebration felt distant, already fading. These people's lives had been disrupted minimally by the conflict that had consumed Japan entirely. They won because they could afford to win, Yamamoto said. Because war didn't destroy them. Because they had so much that even defeat wouldn't have ruined them. We had nothing and bet everything. They had everything and bet only what they could spare. It was truth, harsh and undeniable. Seeing it made defeat more comprehensible, but no less painful. They arrived at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, on August 18th. The facility was enormous, hundreds of barracks, thousands of prisoners, a small city of the defeated. Most were German, captured in Europe. A smaller section held Italian prisoners. The Japanese were a minority, maybe 500 total, segregated more for language and cultural reasons than from any hostility. The camp's commandant, Colonel James Harrison, addressed new arrivals through an interpreter. His words were translated into Japanese by a Nisei soldier, second-generation Japanese-American, who spoke both languages fluently. Welcome to Camp McCoy. You are prisoners of war under protection of the Geneva Convention. You will be treated humanely. You will receive adequate food, shelter, and medical care. You will work, but only in capacities allowed by international law. You will not be abused. You will not be starved. You will not be tortured. You will be held until arrangements can be made for your repatriation to Japan. This is American policy. This is how we treat prisoners. Any questions? The prisoners stood in silence. Questions? They had hundreds, but they didn't know how to ask them. How do you ask why enemies are showing mercy? How do you question kindness when you expected cruelty? They were assigned to Barracks 14 in the Japanese section of the camp. The building was wooden, simple, heated by a pot-bellied stove. 24 bunks, thin mattresses, wool blankets. A shared bathroom with running water. Windows with screens, but no bars. These are better conditions than many soldiers experienced at the front, Nakamura observed. How is this punishment? How is this suffering for our dishonor? Perhaps it isn't, Yamamoto replied quietly. Perhaps we were lied to about what capture meant. Days established routines. Morning roll call at 6, breakfast at 6:30, work assignments at 7, lunch at noon, more work until 5, dinner at 6. Free time until lights out at 10. The work was varied grounds maintenance, kitchen duty, laundry service, agricultural work in nearby farms. The Geneva Convention prohibited using prisoners for military labor, but non-military work was allowed and even encouraged. Idle prisoners were unhappy prisoners. Work provided structure and purpose. Yamamoto was assigned to the camp library, a small building with donated books in multiple languages, including some in Japanese. His job was organizing shelves, checking books in and out, maintaining the catalog. Light work, suitable for someone with a permanent leg injury. The library was supervised by Corporal David Shun, a Chinese-American soldier from San Francisco who spoke some Japanese and had studied Asian history before the war. He treated Yamamoto with professional courtesy, explaining tasks clearly, showing patience when language barriers caused confusion. "You read English?" Chun asked on the second day, noticing Yamamoto examining a book about American history. "Little bit," Yamamoto replied in halting English. "I learn in school. Before war. If you want to improve, I can help. Library work is good for learning language. Why you help?" Yamamoto asked. The question was blunt, but he needed to understand. Sean thought about it. Because the war's over. Because you're going to go home eventually. Because maybe, if you understand America better, you'll help Japan rebuild into something better than what started this war. Because helping people learn is what libraries are for. It was an answer, but not an explanation. The idea that enemies could help each other after war ended was foreign to everything Yamamoto had been taught. In September, prisoners received authorization to send letters home through the Red Cross. The letters would be censored, delayed, but they represented the first communication many prisoners had with families since capture. Yamamoto wrote to his parents in Nagano, "Honorable Father and Mother, I am alive and being held in a prisoner camp in America. I write to inform you of my disgrace. I was captured rather than dying honorably. I have brought shame to our family. I accept any consequences you deem appropriate, including disowning me. I live in shame, but wanted you to know I survived. Your dishonored son, Takeshi." The letter took 2 months to reach Japan. The response took another 2 months. When it arrived in January 1946, it was not what he expected. "Dearest Takeshi, we received your letter with joy and relief. You are alive. That is what matters. The war is over." The old ideas about honor and shame are being questioned. We are learning that much of what we were taught was propaganda designed to make us sacrifice everything. You were wounded and captured. You survived. Come home when you can. We want to see you, to hold you, to help you heal. You brought no shame. You survived impossible circumstances. That is honor enough. Your loving parents Yamamoto read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. His parents didn't reject him. They wanted him home. The shame he'd carried for 18 months was, what? Unnecessary? Based on false teaching? Other prisoners received similar letters. Families grateful for survival. Parents questioning the ideology that had taught their sons that death was preferable to capture. A nation beginning to examine the lies that had led to destruction. Corporal Chun took his suggestion about helping Yamamoto learn English seriously. He began informal lessons in the library during slow afternoons, teaching vocabulary, explaining grammar, discussing American history and culture. Why did America enter the war? Yamamoto asked one day. His English was improving steadily. "We were attacked," Chun replied. "Pearl Harbor. December 1941. Your military sank ships, destroyed aircraft, ended many lives. We responded. I know this history. But why did America fight so ... completely? Why not negotiate peace earlier?" Chun thought carefully about how to explain. "Because we believe some things aren't negotiable. Freedom, democracy, self-determination. Japan's military government was trying to dominate Asia, to create an empire through conquest. We opposed that, but America has territories too. Philippines, Hawaii, islands across Pacific. How is that different? That's a fair question, Chun admitted. America isn't perfect. We have our own history of conquest and imperialism. But we're trying to be better. The Philippines will get independence soon. Hawaii will likely become a state with full representation. We're learning that empire is wrong. I hope Japan learns the same lesson. These conversations were revolutionary. No Japanese officer would have allowed such open discussion about ideology, about questioning national policies, about admitting imperfections. But here, in a prison library in Wisconsin, an American soldier and a Japanese prisoner debated complex topics as equals. "What happens to me?" Yamamoto asked. "When I go home?" "You rebuild," Chun replied. "You take what you've learned here and help create a better Japan. You teach others that former enemies can become partners. You show that defeat doesn't mean destruction. It means opportunity to transform." That is optimistic view. Maybe. But I've seen Germany after World War I. We crushed them, humiliated them, extracted revenge. 20 years later, they started another war. This time, we're trying something different, helping defeated nations rebuild, turning enemies into allies. It might not work, but it's worth trying. November brought an influenza outbreak. Dozens of prisoners fell sick fevers, coughs, body aches. The camp hospital, designed for minor injuries, was overwhelmed. Yamamoto contracted the illness in mid-November. His fever spiked to 104 degrees. His weakened leg became inflamed, the old wound reacting to systemic infection. He was transferred to the hospital, delirious and barely conscious. For 3 days, he drifted between fever dreams and painful waking. He was cared for by American medical personnel who monitored him constantly, administered medication, changed his 4 fluids, cooled his fever with ice baths. When his fever broke on the 4th day, he woke to find a doctor sitting beside his bed, an older man, maybe 50, with gray hair and tired eyes. "Welcome back," the doctor said in broken Japanese. "You gave us quite a scare." "Why?" Yamamoto asked weakly. "Why save enemy prisoner?" The doctor looked at him carefully. "Because you're not enemy anymore. War's over. You're just a sick patient who needed care. That's what doctors do. We treat sick people. That's all. In Japan, prisoners were not treated with such care." The doctor's expression hardened. "I know. We've heard stories, seen evidence. It was wrong. Just because your military did wrong doesn't mean we should do wrong in response. We're trying to be better than that. I do not understand American thinking," Yamamoto admitted. "That's okay," the doctor replied. "You have time to learn. Rest now. Heal. When you're strong enough, you'll leave the hospital and continue recovering. Eventually, you'll go home. Maybe then you'll understand." December 25, 1945. Christmas was alien to most Japanese prisoners, a Christian holiday, unfamiliar, strange. But the camp celebrated regardless, making small accommodations for the cultural differences. The mess hall served special meals, turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, pie. Decorations hung from walls, paper chains, donated ornaments, a small pine tree in the corner. The camp chaplain offered a service, conducted in English, but with a translator providing Japanese interpretation for interested prisoners. Yamamoto attended, curious about American religious practices. The chaplain spoke about peace, reconciliation, forgiveness, about enemies learning to coexist, about the possibility of building better futures from the ruins of war. After the service, the chaplain approached the Japanese prisoners through the translator. "I know this holiday is not yours. I know you have your own traditions. But the message about peace, about treating each other well, about hoping for better days, that's universal. War is over. You'll go home soon. When you do, I hope you take some of that message with you." That evening, prisoners gathered in their barracks. They had no gifts to exchange, No special celebration. But they talked about home, about families, about what they'd learned in captivity, about what they'd do when they returned to Japan. "I want to teach," Tanaka said. He was 20 now, would be 21 by the time he was repatriated. Teach children that war is destructive, that what we were taught about honor and sacrifice was lies, that enemies can be decent to each other. "I want to farm," Nakamura said. "Like my father, grow food, help rebuild, never touch a weapon again." "I want to learn more," Yamamoto added, "about America, about democracy, about why they treat defeated enemies with dignity. I want to understand so I can help Japan become something better." They sat in the warm barracks while snow fell outside, 23 men who'd expected death and found mercy, trying to make sense of it all. March 1946 brought news repatriation would begin soon. Ships were being prepared to transport prisoners back to Japan. Processing would take months, but movement was starting. The camp administration offered prisoners a choice. Those with useful skills could stay longer, working for wages, helping with camp operations, while other prisoners went home. The wages would be held in trust, paid when they eventually returned to Japan. For prisoners going home to destroyed cities and economic collapse, the money would help. Yamamoto volunteered to stay. His library work was valuable. His English had improved to near fluency. He could help orient new prisoners, translate documents, assist with administration. And honestly, he wasn't ready to face Japan yet. Wasn't ready to see the destruction, the defeat, the transformation that awaited. Many prisoners made similar choices. Staying in America a few more months, earning money, preparing mentally for return to a homeland that no longer existed as they'd known it. Through spring and summer, Yamamoto worked and learned. Corporal Chun continued teaching him about American history, political systems, democratic principles. They became, in their careful way, something close to friends, the relationship constrained by military hierarchy and recent enmity, but real nonetheless. "What will you do?" Yamamoto asked Chun one afternoon. "When camp closes, go home to San Francisco. Go to college on GI Bill. Maybe become a teacher. Maybe work in libraries. I like books. I like helping people learn. I will miss our conversations," Yamamoto admitted. "Write to me," Chun suggested. "When you get home, tell me about Japan's rebuilding. Tell me if what we talked about here makes sense there. Tell me if enemies really can become partners." "I will try," Yamamoto promised. September 1946. 13 months after arriving at Camp McCoy, Yamamoto's repatriation orders came through. He would leave in 3 days, travel to San Francisco, board a transport ship to Yokohama. Return to a Japan he'd left 5 years earlier as a soldier of an empire. Return as a defeated prisoner who'd learned uncomfortable truths about propaganda, honor, and humanity. On his last evening, Colonel Harrison called into his office. The camp commandant, who'd addressed them on arrival, who'd enforced Geneva Convention standards with strict precision, who'd treated prisoners as humans deserving dignity. "You've been a model prisoner, Yamamoto. Excellent work in the library. No disciplinary issues. I wanted to thank you personally. Thank you, Colonel, for everything. For treatment that contradicted every expectation." Harrison nodded. "I read your intake report. You tried to take your own life rather than be captured. You believed capture meant torture and death. I'm glad we proved that wrong." "Why did you?" Yamamoto asked. "Prove it wrong? Why show mercy to enemies?" Harrison thought carefully. "Because we're trying to build a different world. The old way crushing defeated enemies, extracting revenge, creating cycles of hatred that led to this war. We're trying something new, treating defeated enemies with dignity, helping them rebuild, turning yesterday's opponents into tomorrow's allies. It might not work, but it's worth trying." "It worked on me," Yamamoto said quietly. I arrived expecting to hate Americans, to find confirmation of propaganda. Instead, I found ... humanity, kindness, system that cares about prisoners' welfare. I return home with different understanding. That's all I can ask, Harrison replied. Go home, help rebuild, teach others what you learned here. That's how we prevent the next war, not through treaties, but through individuals who learned that former enemies can be decent to each other. The voyage to Yokohama took 2 weeks. Yamamoto stood on deck as the ship approached Japan, seeing homeland for the first time in 5 years. The coastline looked scarred. Cities showed bomb damage, even from distance. Everything looked smaller, more fragile, more damaged than memory suggested. When he disembarked, he was processed through repatriation facilities, examined, documented, given basic supplies and transportation vouchers, then released into a Japan that felt more foreign than America had. He took a train to Nagano. The countryside showed less damage than cities, but poverty was everywhere. People looked thin, tired, working to rebuild from nothing. The empire was gone. The military government had collapsed. American occupation forces maintained order while Japan drafted new constitution, established democracy, transformed into something unprecedented. His parents met him at the train station. They looked older, thinner, but alive. They embraced him, his mother crying, his father stoic but emotional, both welcoming him home without shame or judgment. Tell us about America, his father said that evening over a simple meal of rice and pickles. Tell us about captivity. Tell us truth, not what propaganda claimed. Yamamoto told them. About Camp McCoy, about medical care and adequate food, about Colonel Harrison and Corporal Chun, about library work and English lessons and conversations about democracy, about learning that enemies could treat each other with dignity, about understanding that propaganda had lied about everything that mattered. We were fools, his father said quietly. We believed leaders who sent sons to die for lies. We sacrificed everything for empire that deserved to fall. We must not make same mistake again, Yamamoto replied. We must question. We must learn. We must build Japan on truth instead of propaganda. Yamamoto found work as a translator for occupation forces. His English was excellent. His understanding of both cultures was valuable. He helped bridge communication between Japanese civilians and American administrators, facilitating the transformation that was remaking his homeland. He also taught informal classes for Japanese students wanting to learn English, wanting to understand American system that was being adapted to Japanese context. He taught language, but also values, democracy, individual rights, the importance of questioning authority, the lesson that former enemies could become partners. In 1948, he received a letter from Corporal Chun, now a university student in California. Dear Takashi, I hope this letter finds you well in adjusting to the new Japan. I read about the change's new constitution, democratic government, economic recovery beginning. It sounds like Japan is transforming into something better than what existed before. I'm studying library science and education, hoping to become a teacher, maybe work in libraries helping people learn. I think often about our conversations in the camp library, about how enemies can learn from each other, about how defeat can become opportunity for growth. I hope you're helping Japan learn those lessons. Your friend, David Chan Yamamoto, wrote back, beginning a correspondence that would last decades. They shared observations about their countries, about recovery and transformation, about the possibilities and limits of reconciliation. The letters were bridges across the divide of war, proof that individuals could maintain humanity even when nations fought. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, Yamamoto returned to America for the first time since his repatriation. He was 67, retired from a career teaching English and American history at a Tokyo university. He'd raised 3 children who'd never known war. who'd grown up in democratic Japan allied with America, who couldn't imagine the hatred and propaganda that had defined their father's youth. He traveled to Wisconsin. Camp McCoy had been deactivated after the war, converted to other military purposes, but parts remained. He walked grounds he'd once traversed as a prisoner, remembering. He found David Chun through mutual contacts. Chun was now a retired librarian in San Francisco, 66, with grandchildren and memories of a war that felt increasingly distant. They met at a cafe in Madison, two old men who'd once been enemies and had become something else through circumstance and choice. Did it work? Yamamoto asked. The experiment of treating enemies with dignity? Did it prevent the next war? Chun thought about it. Between our countries? Yes, Japan and America are allies now, partners, friends. That's unprecedented in history. Defeated nations usually harbor resentment for generations. But Japan rebuilt with American help, became democratic, became prosperous, became proof that former enemies can become partners. It worked because individuals chose to make it work, Yamamoto said. Because camp commanders like Harrison chose dignity over revenge. Because soldiers like you chose to teach rather than hate. Because prisoners like me chose to learn rather than cling to propaganda. System allowed it, but individuals made it real. Are you still angry? Chun asked. About the war? About defeat? About being captured? Yamamoto considered. No. How can I be angry about experiences that taught me truth? I was lied to for years. Taught that Americans were demons. That capture meant torture. That honor required death. Camp McCoy disproved all of it. I'm grateful for that education, even if circumstances were painful. I'm glad we treated you well, Chun said. Glad we proved propaganda wrong. Glad you took those lessons home and helped rebuild Japan into something better. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching Madison's streets fill with people who'd never known war, who lived in a world partly built by choices made 40 years earlier in a prisoner camp in Wisconsin. Takeshi Yamamoto died in 2001 at age 83. Among his possessions, his children found a journal-detailed account of his captivity at Camp McCoy, his repatriation, his work rebuilding Japan. The journal had been kept meticulously, documenting transformation from defeated soldier expecting cruelty to educator teaching reconciliation. One entry, dated Christmas 1945, read, "Today I experienced American Christmas celebration. Strange holiday, foreign customs, but message resonates universally. Peace, forgiveness, hope for better future. I think about what I expected when captured, torture, humiliation, death. I think about what I received: medical care, adequate food, dignity, education. The disparity between expectation and reality has shattered everything I believed about enemies and honor and what defeat means. I was taught that capture meant shame worse than death. I was taught that Americans would treat prisoners with cruelty. I was taught that only death could restore honor. All lies. Every lesson propaganda taught was designed to make us sacrifice everything for leaders who deserved nothing. I cannot change that I was captured. I cannot undo the shame I felt. But I can choose what I do with this experience. I can choose to learn from Americans who showed mercy when cruelty would have been easier. I can choose to teach others these lessons. I can choose to help Japan become something better than what sent me to war. This is not the honor I was taught to seek. But perhaps it is truer honor to survive, to learn, to grow, to help others do the same. Perhaps real honor is not dying for lies, but living for truth. I hope so, because if it is, then captivity was not shame but opportunity. And these months in Wisconsin were not punishment, but education that will guide everything I do hereafter. The story of Japanese prisoners at Camp McCoy is small in the grand narrative of World War II. No major battle turned on their treatment. No strategic objective was accomplished by showing them dignity. But for 23 men who arrived expecting death and found mercy, it was everything. For the students Yamamoto taught afterward children who learned to question propaganda, to value peace, to understand that former enemies could become partners. It was the foundation of their education. For Japan's transformation from militaristic empire to democratic ally, it was one small thread in a larger tapestry of reconciliation, woven by thousands of similar encounters. This is how wars truly end. Not with surrender documents or occupation policies or peace treaties, but with individuals choosing to treat defeated enemies with dignity, with prisoners learning that propaganda lied, with guards choosing mercy over vengeance, with both sides discovering that humanity survives war if people choose to preserve it. Takeshi Yamamoto arrived in America expecting torture and found treatment that contradicted every expectation. That experience multiplied across thousands of prisoners, across both sides of the conflict, across all the small moments when individuals chose decency over cruelty transformed enemies into allies. Not perfectly, not completely, but sufficiently to prevent the next war, sufficiently to build partnership from enmity, sufficiently to prove that defeat doesn't require destruction and victory doesn't require vengeance. Just individuals choosing, in small ways, to be decent, to show mercy, to teach truth, to preserve humanity even in war's aftermath. That choice made by American guards and Japanese prisoners, by camp commanders and translators, by doctors and patients, and everyone who participated in the system, echoes forward still. A reminder that we are all, finally, capable of being better than our propaganda claims, that enemies can become partners, that mercy is stronger than vengeance, that the best victories come not from crushing opponents, but from transforming them into allies, one prisoner at a time, one act of dignity at a time, one truth learned at a time. That's how we prevent the next war. That's how we build peace. That's how we remain human, even when circumstances try to make us monsters. Especially then.